Now, we all know, Bob, that as a business, when the fight is big enough, you've worked with Don King, you've worked with De La Hoya, even Al Heyman. How do you make this happen?
Al Heyman, he refuses to allow any of his fighters to get beat by a top-ranked fighter. And if Terrence fights Errol Spence, there's one winner, and that's Terrence Crawford. That's Terrence Crawford. That's Terrence Crawford. That's Terrence Crawford fights Errol Spence. There's one winner, and that's Terrence Crawford. And Al Heyman refuses to allow it.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Errol Spence had this to say. He says, "I'll definitely stop Crawford. Kavaliauskas dropped him. Gamboa hurt him." He was quoted as saying, "I feel that's just a legendary fight. A fight that, people talk about, for a long time," said Spence, who has recovered from his injury suffered in a one-car accident on October 10th in Dallas. I just feel a lot of young boxers and things like that will definitely, watch that fight and remember that, because I feel like we both have the skill set. We both have the talent, we both have the will. But at the same time, at the end of the day, I feel like I'll wash Terrence Crawford. I feel like I'll beat him. I'll punish him. If that guy, if the Russian dude, whoever he fought, could knock him down or drop him, I definitely have a great chance of stopping him," Spence explained. "And I think that he's been hurt by Gamboa too, so I definitely have a great chance of stopping him. But I respect his skill set. He's got good skills, but I think I'll definitely stop him." There's no surprises here. This is the kind of stuff you expect to hear. I mean, Terrence Crawford, he said something very similar about Errol Spence. He says, "I truly feel when I fight Spence, I'ma fuck him up." Portion of the article reads, Crawford recounted some of their conversations as part of Chris Mannix's most recent Sports Illustrated boxing podcast. Crawford was quoted as saying, "I wouldn't say we talk regularly, but I hit him up a couple of times and, we got on FaceTime and spoke briefly. It was just, us talking about making a fight. That was pretty much it. I told him I was gonna fuck him up." Crawford laughed after making that statement, but that is exactly what the WBO welterweight champion expects to happen if they ever meet in what's one of boxing's most anticipated matchups. Israel Crawford said, "I truly feel when we fight, I'm gonna fuck him up, and he feels the same way. So that's why it makes for a great fight. You've got the two top welterweights in the division telling the media that they're gonna fuck each other up, So let's see who's telling the truth at the end of the day." Crawford went on to say, "My seat was right behind, caddy corner, right behind him, and his seat was in front of me," Crawford said. "And I had tapped him, you know what I mean? He turned around like, see? Like I just let him know, like, that's gonna be us, you know what I mean? And he was just like, man, I'm gonna wash you." I was like, yeah, you gotta get in the ring to do that first, you know what I mean? So it was just little jokes between us two. I'm gonna tell you something. This is a fight that we seldom ever talk about here on the channel in realistic terms as the politics of boxing,
that shit,
preventing it from being realized. Thus, whenever the fight is discussed, it's more about the politics and less about the boxing. The political aspect of it tends to dominate the conversation, what it takes to make the fight and whether or not it'll ever come into fruition. That's what usually dominates the conversation.
Yeah, most of the time.
But if we could for a moment get away from that.
If we could.
I want to say that I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if these two guys never fought.
Nope.
Wouldn't surprise me at all.
Nope.
The sport of boxing is riddled with these kind of fights that never came into being. Fights like Bo versus Lewis. Kind of stuff. I mean, it does happen. So I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if these two guys never fight. But if by some chance they do, they did, terms can be reached and the fight comes into fruition, what do I think would happen? Well, I don't think many of you out there will be surprised to hear that I have Terrence Crawford winning the fight. And I can only tell you what I think. I can only tell you what I think and what led me to that conclusion. Why I feel that way. I can only tell you what I think. And if you want to know what I think, if you want to know, you're here, so I'll assume that you do. This is what I think. I've no stock in Errol Spence's claims that he would knock out Terrence Crawford, that he would stop that guy. I've no stock in that kind of talk.
I don't believe you.
No, I don't buy it. A big part of the reason that I don't buy it is because Errol Spence failed to stop a blown-up lightweight with no experience in the welterweight division. A guy who wasn't even really fighting back. A guy wasn't really throwing any punches, whereas Errol Spence landed about 345 shots on this chubby lightweight. And he couldn't stop him. Couldn't drop him.
You know what I'm talking about.
Mikey Garcia. They served him up to you on a platter. You couldn't stop that guy. You couldn't even drop that guy. But you're gonna stop Terrence Crawford.
Give me a break.
I don't buy into Errol Spence's talk of stopping Terrence Crawford, as I saw Errol Spence saying that he was gonna stop Sean Porter. You tell me. Did he stop that guy? Is that how it happened? Is that how it all worked out?
Nah.
Is that what happened? Did he stop him?
Nah.
No. No, he didn't stop him. And I knew he wasn't going to stop him, but that's besides the point. It's not about whether I knew Errol wasn't going to stop Sean Porter. I said he wasn't going to stop Sean Porter. I said, Sean Porter, he's got to chin that guy. And Errol Spence, his power is not as advertised. So I didn't believe he was going to stop Sean. I believed the fight would go to the cards, and that's very much what happened. So when I see that Errol Spence here today is saying pretty much the same thing he was saying.
The same shit.
The same thing about Terrence Crawford that he was saying about Sean Porter. No, I don't expect Errol Spence to deliver. So he didn't deliver before, so he's going to start delivering now? I don't think so. What Errol Spence figures is that because Igis Kavaliauskas was able to drop Terrence Crawford, let's be honest, that's what he did. He did drop Crawford. What Errol figures is that because a guy like Igis Kavaliauskas could drop Crawford, that Errol Spence might have the same as, if not better luck, against Crawford.
Really?
Igis dropped Bud off a big right hand.
Paying attention?
Errol thinks he could do a little better than that, but therein lies a dilemma.
What?
Igis dropped Crawford off a big right hand.
I don't understand.
And Igis is an orthodox fighter.
Orthopedic?
An orthodox fighter, not a southpaw. Not a southpaw like Errol Spence is a southpaw. Thus, Igis being an orthodox fighter, his right hand is his power hand, whereas for Errol, that's his jab hand.
Not his power hand.
It's not going to be the hand you're looking to deliver your power shots with. It's a different dynamic entirely. Those southpaws, they can be a real pain in the ass. They can, especially to an orthodox fighter, because the southpaw's jab could at times come over the top of the orthodox fighter's jab, since they're both moving in the same direction with opposite hands. Thus, lead foot advantage comes into play.
What's that?
Comes into play when it's a southpaw versus an orthodox fighter. Southpaw tends to have the advantage, but Errol won't have that advantage against Crawford, because Crawford, he can fight southpaw too.
Like you.
Matter of fact, he's ambidextrous. He can fight out of both the southpaw stance or the orthodox stance. So he usually does come out
As a southpaw.
as a southpaw, just like Errol. So that advantage that Errol had over Cal Brook, that advantage that he had over Mikey Garcia and Chris Algieri, all these other guys, that advantage that Errol had in those fights won't be an advantage that he has in this fight. He won't be able to throw him off the way he threw some others off, because he's leading with the same hand that you are, thereby offsetting that advantage that Errol Spence usually has. At which point, it then becomes a question of who is the more malleable and skilled boxer. I happen to think that's Terrence Crawford. We just talked about how where Errol Spence is a southpaw, Terrence Crawford is ambidextrous. He can fight both as a southpaw and an orthodox fighter.
That's an advantage.
But why? What makes that an advantage? What makes being able to fight both as an orthodox fighter and a southpaw an advantage that Crawford would have over Spence? Well, Terrence Crawford starts off this fight the way he starts off most fights, as a southpaw.
Right.
He will be able to offset Errol Spence being a southpaw by fighting as one himself. And this will go on for a couple of rounds. It will.
Oh, yeah.
But until Terrence Crawford decides to switch off to orthodox.
Why?
So he can thereby activate the southpaw killer. That's right. Southpaw killer. And you know what the southpaw killer is, right?
No, what?
The straight right hand.
What?
The straight right hand out of the orthodox stance. You spend the first 5 or 6 rounds fighting Crawford,
right,
who's fighting out of the southpaw stance, and suddenly you find yourself having to defend against straight right hands. For southpaw, that can be difficult. In all the ways that it can be difficult for the orthodox fighter to defend against the southpaw's jab, the southpaw finds difficulty defending against the orthodox fighter's straight right hand.
Try and keep up.
It's actually a part of the reason that Igis Kavaliauskas was able to catch Crawford and drop him. What did he drop him with, kids?
A big right hand.
So hypothetically speaking, if Terrence Crawford has already spent several rounds fighting out of the southpaw stance, same stance that Errol Spence uses, and he suddenly decides to switch off, he goes to orthodox, he can then employ the straight right hand, which a southpaw, like Errol Spence, is susceptible to. And this will throw Errol Spence off because, well, he just spent the last 5-6 rounds fighting a southpaw. Now he's fighting an orthodox fighter. You might as well be in there with a different guy. Let's talk base styles. Errol Spence, he's got one. Terrence Crawford, He's got two, more or less. Errol Spence's base style is best described as a boxer puncher. He'll use the boxing to implement the punching by way of showing the jab, working his way mid-range to inside with it. Errol Spence is not a long-distance outside fighter. When he implements that jab, he's using it as a key to get mid-range to inside, where he can then hook off. Fire hooks up top, fire hooks downstairs. Lest we forget, Errol Spence is a bit of a body puncher, isn't he?
Yeah.
Along with being a body puncher, he's a boxer puncher. Terrence Crawford, he lives somewhere in between. A boxer puncher, like Spence is a boxer puncher, and a pure boxer. And in case you didn't know this, a pure boxer just so happens to have a stylistic advantage over a boxer puncher.
Really?
That's right. You see, that pure boxer doesn't open up as much as a boxer puncher. The pure boxer is characteristically economic, and they're economic for a reason. They focus on accuracy, efficiency, whilst simultaneously not giving the other guy very many openings. This is hell for a boxer puncher. Terrence Crawford is capable of operating in this manner, being the sniper, the long-distance guy, picking his spots, taking his time, measuring distance, using his jab and using his legs to maintain it. He's capable of fighting in this fashion for several rounds.
I see.
At some point, usually in the mid to late rounds, that's when he switches off. That's when he starts letting those hands go, teeing off on his opponent. It's at this point that Terrence Crawford switches from being a pure boxer to more of a boxer puncher. I'd have to say that if there is an area of opportunity for Spence to catch Crawford, something hard, it's mid-range to inside, when Crawford's being more the boxer puncher and less the pure boxer. The advantage for Crawford, however, is that if things are getting hairy, he can always go back to being a pure boxer.
At his discretion.
Picking his spots, taking his time, not giving Spence very many opportunities to catch him with anything.
Being economic.
Terrence Crawford has the luxury of options. He has the luxury of switching from orthodox to southpaw, from a pure boxer to a boxer puncher. Whereas Spence is a little bit more straightforward. He's a good boxer puncher, but he's not the most nuanced guy. Terrence Crawford's got more ways of fighting a fight than Spence does. It's for those reasons I give him that advantage. And, you often hear it said from Errol Spence's fans that Errol is simply too big a guy and too strong a puncher. And I don't know where they derive those kind of conclusions from. I mean, yes, Errol Spence is on the more generous end of the spectrum as far as welterweights go.
He is.
But he really isn't so big that he can't be worked around. I mean, have you guys seen the tail of the tape on Errol Spence? Errol Spence's physical dimensions, they're about the same as Igor Kavaliauskas. I mean, you do realize that, right? That if you're talking about their frame and how big a welterweight Spence is compared to what other welterweights are out there, he's no bigger than Igor Kavaliauskas. What, about 5'9", close to 5'10", 71, 72-inch wingspan?
Is that it?
They're about the same. Errol Spence is one of the more beefy welterweights that are out there. He is. But so is Igor Kavaliauskas and Jeff Horn and Jose Benavidez. That's one of the more statuesque guys in the entire welterweight division. How many welterweights out there stand in at close to 6 feet tall? How many? Terrence Crawford stopped that guy nonetheless. So you'll excuse me for saying so, but
Snuffing.
Errol Spence does not possess such physically imposing size that Terrence Crawford can't work around him.
Can work around him just fine.
He's already worked around guys, stopped guys with comparable dimensions, some bigger even than Errol Spence is. I mean, if size is your argument, if size is your failsafe as to why Spence stops Crawford, I hate to break the news to you, but Errol Spence ain't even the biggest welterweight Terrence Crawford's fought before.
He wouldn't be.
It's gonna take more than size to win the fight. Don't regale me with myths of Errol Spence's punching power, because this guy went 12 rounds with a fucking lightweight and couldn't even knock him down.
I'm lying.
At the end of the day, Errol Spence is a good, solid boxer puncher, but he's not that big a welterweight, and he's not that big a hitter.
Sorry.
Because if he were, there's no fucking way some lightweight just fought in his last fight at 135 is gonna go 12 rounds with him at 147.
There's no way.
Not if he were the puncher that you guys think he is. And these guys, they're always prattling on about how Errol Spence is too strong and he's too big, and I think what they're not realizing is, Errol Spence is on the big side.
He's junky.
And the longer this fight takes to make, the more that is going to work against him. Well, maybe he can make welterweight comfortable now.
For now.
Maybe. What about a couple of months from now? What about a year from now? But essentially, the longer this fight takes to make, the harder it's going to become for Spence to make welterweight. Terrence Crawford, he's not busting at the seams to make 147, but Spence might be. A couple of months' time and a year's time, if it takes that long to make this fight.
It's a variable.
It's a wild card. We don't know how long Spence will be able to make welterweight comfortably. Errol Spence might tell the pundits, boxing community at large, that he has no intention of leaving the welterweight division until he unifies all the belts. But put simply, that's not a decision that he can make. That's a decision that his body will make for him. And if he tries to go against what his body's telling him, you know what's going to happen. He's going to try to make the weight, and he's going to be drained. If he stays at welterweight for too long, or if this fight takes too long to make. That the same thing these guys think is working against Crawford is actually working against Spence. Yeah, he's on the bigger end of the spectrum as far as welterweights go. This guy's got to cut a lot of weight to get down to 147. Much longer do you guys out there think he's going to be able to keep doing that, you know? Just keep pissing the time away, fighting Mikey Garcias, Danny Garcias, anybody but Crawford, right?
Go ahead.
Pissing the time away. Go ahead, keep doing it. There's a lot of talk of Errol Spence's car accident and the actual physical state of the fighter. There are those out there that think he's damaged goods as a result of flipping that Ferrari. It's another wild card. That's another variable. We won't know the true state of Errol Spence's condition and his ability to perform thereafter until he is required to perform. Although that really is something to think about because, you know, Felix Fidel had that motorcycle accident, right?
Right.
He ain't been the same since. Now, Errol Spence's accident was a lot more horrific. Is it possible that that might have taken something out of him? Something he can't get back? I don't know. I mean, we really won't have the answer to that particular question until boxing resumes and Errol is required to perform. It's definitely something to think about. It's definitely something to consider. It is a wild card, a variable. But look, guys, if you wanted to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, that's what I think, and that's why I think that, you know? But when it comes to Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence, I feel that Terrence Crawford has more ways of fighting a fight.
Broader skill set.
More ways of winning a fight. And there are certain aforementioned factors, certain variables that on a long enough timeline are actually working against Spence. So I've got Terrence Crawford winning the fight. It's assuming the fight ever comes off, but if it does, that's who I'm going with. Going with Terrence Crawford. You can feel free to disagree. You can pick who you like for whatever reason you like him. If you wanted to know what I think, that's what I think.